Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of all of living nature, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we complete a 5-day program today on the crisis of democracy in the United States. Over the past week, we've been looking at the challenges to American democracy from a variety of perspectives. We have been cognizant that the challenges of democracy in America are replicated in different ways with the rising authoritarianism really around the world. So even though we've been looking at the microcosm of America, we're mindful that democracy is under challenge, literally worldwide. And this is a code red situation. We have a code red in climate. We also have a code red in democracy. And in the United States, we have a crucial election coming up 7 months from now in November. And so there's a massive mobilization among people of goodwill across this country and around the world to ensure that democracy prevails, because at the heart of saving democracy is our collective ability to take on global challenges like climate change and a variety of other issues that are acutely challenging our world. So that is our program. I want to thank you for joining wherever you are in our global community. And before we launch into our program, let's just take a minute in the midst of all the hustle and bustle and crises that we're trying to navigate our way through, and just center ourselves in our bodies just for a moment. Relax into your body. And close your eyes if you can, and attune yourself with your heart. And for the next minute, just feel your heart, and through your heart, feel each other in the spirit of deep ecumenism that all of us everywhere know goodness, especially if we discern it in community. Thank you, everyone. Now I'd like to introduce my good friend and colleague, George Capinelli, who's been the convener of all of our programs over the past 2 years here at Humanity Rising on Democracy, and has been making a very concerted attempt with 2 programs, 2 5-day programs now on democracy, which will be continued over the next 7 months as we approach the November election. So George, thank you. And I also want to acknowledge John Steiner and Margot King, who've been working with George on these programs. It's been a stellar stellar group of people that have been brought together around preserving democracy as we know it. George, welcome.
Good to see you, Jim, as always, and to collaborate. And thanks for having created this great this platform that we're going to be expanding even more to bring this kind of truth and awareness to people around the globe, hopefully. I want to welcome our audience today. If you've missed any of the other 4 programs this week or the 5 programs that preceded it in March, I really encourage you to go to Humanity Rising Solutions, to Ubiquity. You'll find all of those programs there. In a dialogue we had with a group of citizens yesterday, one of our good friends and associates was already saying that he was sharing links to these programs to people in his world because he realized that it was such an opportunity to have a direct experience with people who are doing extraordinary work to save democracy and, as Jim has pointed out, to save humanity, the other species, and our habitat as well. We started these democracy dialogues to bring together leading voices of our time in a broad range of fields. And so far, thanks to John and Margot and a group of collaborators, we've done, I think, a pretty good job of making that possible. So as you participate in today's program, I want you to listen for specific things that you can do yourself. Because although Jim said, and said in truth, that there is this massive mobilization of remarkable people who are doing extraordinary and courageous things to protect our democracy and give us the opportunity to fill in some of the holes that we've discovered are there and go on this journey, continue on this journey to creating a more perfect union. In my opinion, it's not yet massive enough. And the place that needs more support is from those of us who are private citizens, we the people. We really do need to get engaged. We really do need to ask ourselves, are we aware enough of what's at stake here? And are we willing to do the things that we can do? We don't have to become politicians or candidates or activists, but we are citizens, and that has a moral and an ethical sense of both authority and responsibility. And so I encourage you to ask yourself, what can I do to make a difference? And with that, I want to invite John Steiner, who many of you have gotten to know, and who he and his wife Margot have been such really remarkable champions for so many important political and socially related causes. And so, John, would you bring our guests in and let's get cracking, as they say, huh?
Jim and Barbara, come on board. Unmute, yes. Welcome, Jim, and welcome, Barbara. So, friends, it is really our good fortune and privilege to have with us 2 esteemed religious and social change leaders who are very much in the lineage of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They have come together to create and lead Faiths United to Save Democracy, a 10-state, nonpartisan, multiracial, interfaith, and multi-generational voter registration justice campaign with a toolkit to make voting easier for vulnerable populations. And because of who you 2 are, I'm going to take a little more time than usual to tell our audience about you guys. Reverend Jim Wallis, whom my wife Margot and I are fortunate to count as good friends and fellow baseball lovers, is one of our great public theologians. He is an author of many books, including Soul of a Nation. His podcast by that name features conversations, and it's worth looking up to find out who these folks are, with grassroots activists, organizers, political leaders, and he discusses how to take action to promote racial and social justice and life and peace across the divides, as well as environmental stewardship. He served on President Barack Obama's White House Advisory Council on faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, and has taught faith in public life at Harvard and Georgetown University. Last year, after founding and leading the important magazine Sojourners for 50 years, that's right, 50 years, he doesn't look like it. Jim accepted an invitation from Georgetown University's McCourt School of Public Policy to serve as their inaugural chair and founding director of the Center on Faith and Justice. He continues to engage with Sojourners as a founder and ambassador to the mission. His written works will continue to appear there. And he continues to be a key partner in their collaborative work, which in part has led to what we're going to hear about today. And I just want to read the mission of Sojourners, which is to seek to inspire hope and build a movement to transform individuals, communities, the church, and the world. Jim has devoted his life and continues to devote his life to that mission. Reverend Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner, whom I'm also getting to meet here for the first time, is the CEO and co-founder of the Skinner Leadership Institute and a trusted advisor, public policy strategist, faith and community leader, author, lecturer, educator, executive coach, and mentor with a profound impact. I have no idea how you have time to do all of this. She regularly works with interfaith leaders on issues like healthcare, criminal justice reform, and voting rights. Widely known as a committed prayer warrior, Barbara regularly prays with and for our congressional leaders from both political parties and sends daily scriptures to many of them. She is the co-founder of a Millennial and Generation X leadership program, the Master Series for Distinguished Leaders, that equips our young leaders, which is obviously so important, to move to the next levels of their lives and career, while also addressing the needs of the disadvantaged in their communities and modeling high moral character. Barbara is also the writer of several books and is the author of Leadership Led by God, Prayer, Journal, and Guide, a book that equips leaders to operate daily in the spirit and character of Jesus, as does Jim. She is the co-convener of the National African American Clergy Network and a recipient of various awards, including the DC Regional Leadership Hall of Fame Award. Now that I've embarrassed both of you enough, I get to ask you a question. Actually, I'd like to start by asking how the two of you came together to found and now lead Faiths United to Save Democracy, and why it is so important at this time in our nation's history. Barbara, let's start with you.
Well, I have been in Washington, D.C. for a very, very long time, working with all kinds of leaders on both political parties. I had yet to meet a white male Protestant leader who was genuinely rooted in his soul and his spirit in the pain of racism that people of color experience, until I met Jim. And so it's very hard not to want to connect, right? At that time, he was running Sojourners. I think I still thought he was kind of like, maybe he's fooling us, maybe he's what. When he wrote God's Politics, I thought that was really the beginning. I got to know his family, and really the essence of a good relationship is when you see each other past the titles. So he's been in my home, I've been in, with his family, and we know each other as people. So we're on this life journey together. So this is not a project for us. This is really our life work. And I would not want to be on this journey with anyone other than Jim Wallis.
Beautiful, Barbara. Jim?
Well, Thomas Merton, the wonderful Catholic mystic, once said that everything is about relationships. And I think that's true. So Barbara and I go way, way back. I mean, she's been on my boards and all that, but I'm on her board, the only board I'm still on. but she is a dear sister. We partner on so many things, and we're tag teaming now on this wonderful new project. Jim Garrison, I haven't seen for a long time. It's great to see Jim again. I like the way he said we're code red on climate change and democracy. And so Barbara and I came together around this. The first iteration was called, Turnout Sunday, which is huge in the Black community, Turnout Sunday, and Lawyers and Collars. I talked to the leader of the Brennan Center years ago. Would you lawyers like some collars, some clergy on election day to be there also? Lawyers are asking some questions, but clergy offer a different kind of presence. And so we can tell stories today about all the polled chaplains that we've trained, 2,000 last time. We're going for 5,000 this time. We are now genuinely multi-faith, multiracial, and multi-generational. That's coming too. So Barbara and I go way back on so many things, and we're working together on many things, but this is core to both of us right now. We had a meeting yesterday with all our clergy leads. I want to have Barbara go through our stages here, but we had the Secretary of State from Pennsylvania on the call. We're going to now do that with all these 10 states. We've recruited and brought in these amazing faith leaders from these 10 states. And Barbara and I often talk after the calls. Our lives are full of many things, but we come out of these calls feeling, I would say, hope and joy. Hope and joy of what these leaders are doing in their states. But to say code red means that small incremental changes are not going to be enough. They're not going to be enough. We're in democracy itself is literally at stake. I had Jamie Raskin at Georgetown just last week. He's, of course, in January 6th committee. He said when the hearings are held, now we know in June, it'll blow the house down. He said that Pence's aides have told them that Mike Pence, standing next to a Secret Service car to take him back to the White House when the insurrection occurred, said, "I'm not getting in that car. I'm not getting in that car until the votes are counted." So here's a vice president that neither Barbara and I have ever been that deeply involved with or supportive of, but observed his oath of office and facing lynching in the Capitol and kidnapping by a former president. Took a stand. So I love what you say. What does it mean for us to take a stand? Barbara and I, all our work is about what does it mean to take a stand. And so unless a lot of us, George, you're right, unless a lot of us take a stand, particularly, I'm going to say, those Americans out of European lineage, white Americans, as we're called, unless we take a stand on this, on voting rights. Voting rights now, for me, is a religious issue. It's about the inherent dignity of each one of us. And Barbara and I would say about the image of God in each one of us. First book of the Bible, Genesis, chapter 1, verse 26, make that we are made in God's image and likeness. And now we're saying the secretaries of state, we're not just nonpartisan. We are that, but we're rooted in the image of God movement. The Imago Dei, you say, the Imago Dei movement is what we're doing. So we're in this together, and I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation with all of you. And we can lay out, Barbara can lay out all of what this means practically. It's built on relationships. And I have this dear, dear sister who you see, who's core to everything that I do now. So I'm blessed to be a kindred spirit and tag team partner with Barbara Wiggins Skinner.
Well, Jim and Barbara, it's It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to spend time with you. Barbara, I have to say that not only am I glad that you are praying with, but for a number of congressmen, because they need all the help they can get. And if they're not smart enough to ask for it directly from source, I'm glad you're giving them that opportunity, you know. And Jim, I have not been, until John introduced me, familiar with the work that both of you are doing. And as I have become familiar, one of the things that I have been both touched and pleased by is not only your concept and your vision, but the practical way you're going about this process. Your toolkit is a work of art. I mean, really.
Thank you.
And there are some things in there that I discovered that just astounded me. When you make that list of the number of unregistered voters in the 10 states that you're operating in,
Mhm.
I don't know what the aggregate number of millions of people, when you're talking about what looks like an average of 28 to 30% of the voters in those states who are unregistered. But that's just astounding. I mean, purely astounding. So talk to us, would you, about some of these very practical and incredibly effective things that you're doing?
So let's just take one of the central issues of voting is getting registered. That's what citizens are supposed to do. But look at the impact of it. This is why practicality is critical to something as important as democracy. So I discovered in researching the 2016 election that there were 6 states in which the margin in which the candidate won, we're nonpartisan, okay, so the candidate won the presidency, was far, far less than the margin of unregistered Black voters. There were 8 million Black voters, so that 30% translates into about 8 to 9 million. Okay, listen to this. Florida, 120,000 was the margin, but there were 336,000 unregistered Black voters. Georgia, which is ground zero for voter suppression right now, the margin by which the president won was 211,000, but the unregistered for 349,000. I mean, but look at the next 2 states. Michigan, the margin was only 11,000, but the unregistered was 240,000. This is from the census. This is not my data. Pennsylvania is just as bad. 44,000 was the margin of victory, 227,000 unregistered. Texas was the same, and Michigan, and North Carolina. So 6 states. So once I looked at that, to me, it's not about voter apathy, it's voter information. I'm not even talking yet about disinformation. I'm saying the number of people who are just simply uninformed about how easy it is to vote. So take the current number of anti-voting laws. There are 440,000 current anti-voting laws proposed, right? But of those laws, that doesn't take away the right to vote. So you can stop me from giving food and water and jail me for that. You can say that I can't go to a drop box. You can say an elderly person can't get a wheelchair. You can say that a person who doesn't speak English can't get a language interpreter. You can say all that, but I can still vote. So what we want to make sure people understood with this toolkit was how you can still vote. I mean, there was a time when, by the way, absentee voting was something that rich white people going to Europe for vacations did because they were away during the election, and military people. We didn't always have these easy voting tools. So I want our people around the country to understand there's a point in the Bible about, what's taken away, but God can work in what's left. So Jim and I are focusing on how to make voting easy. So we put maps together so people can just touch the map for any of the states, find out what ID do I need? Is it a gun license or is it a driver's license? Is it a utility bill? Is it a water bill? So this is really a way of simply making voting easier, even in the midst of all the suppression. That's the issue. And so the toolkit is now in both English and in Spanish. And we reached out today to our Arab Americans groups in Michigan because they wanted interpreted in their language, and our Asian Pacific leaders wanted interpreted in their language. We're simply trying to say democracy is fragile. It's an idea. It can leave us if we don't hold on to it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the noise and the suppression. Yes, it's happening, but as long as we can vote, then let's use the tools.
And Barbara, where can they see that toolkit?
Turnoutsunday.com. Turnoutsunday.com is the website for that. You can download that. Thank you, Jim, for reminding me. Both in English and in Spanish. And we're trying to work now with our Asian Pacific leader to get it translated, at least into traditional Chinese.
And Barbara, the one thing I want to also mention when you say that is not only for people to go to turnoutsunday.com, but if you have anybody that you know who lives in any one of those states and you're out there today as a viewer and as a listener, send them that link. Tell them to share it with everybody that they know. The power of this kind of practical, real, direct steps, it's beyond comprehension about what it can do. So turnoutsunday.com. Put it in the chat. Let's put it in the chat here.
But you can actually, from any state, actually our maps. I wish I could put the toolkit up on the screen, but if you see the maps, if you download it, you'll see that while we have our 10 states highlighted, off to the side, there's a hyperlink from all the way from Alaska down to Wyoming. If you touch that link, you can find out what the voting dates are, what ID you need, and how to register to vote.
Barbara, can you put a link to the toolkit in the chat?
Let me try to see if I can do that.
Okay.
I'm not super techie, but let me tell you what I would prefer doing. I would prefer for a second, does it help if people could actually see the toolkit? Do you have it? Can you show it to them?
I don't have it up.
Oh, you don't have it. Okay. I do. And if you made me, well, okay. So let me get a link in the chat. Let me do that while you're talking to Jim.
And Barbara, yeah, while you're doing that, Jim, I was particularly impressed by your saying to us a while back that at one point you had 100 faith leaders from Georgia on one of your calls. You want to say a little more just about numbers and depth? Because again, and you said this earlier, Barbara, so much of everything is relationship, and people will register when they trust somebody who says, we got to do this, whether it's from their pulpit or from their front door that they already know. And that to me, really along with, and you all know this, with the Movement Voter Project, which is doing the same thing with organizations on the ground. Say a little more about this, the response you're getting from local people, from local faith leaders, and I think the excitement that you're generating.
Well, these are states that there are organized, wealthy, powerful forces that are doing two things. They're trying to make it harder to vote for particular populations. And just to quote the North Carolina court, not my language, but their language, the big monster bill they put forward in North Carolina, the court said these laws are surgically targeted against Black voters. Court language in North Carolina. So this is not accidental. These are the biggest turnout we had since in 100 years was 2020 because it was more possible to vote for people. The pandemic and people made it more possible. Biggest turnout in 2020. So interestingly enough, all these voter suppression laws came in 2021 because people are afraid of that kind of turnout. And I'll just say it directly in a sentence. There are forces in this country who want to prevent our changing demography from changing our democracy. Say it again. They can't change our changing demography, but they're trying to change not let our changing demography really change our democracy. That's what they're doing. They're openly saying so. And so we're responding to that. All these new laws, most came in 2021 after the biggest turnout we've had ever in 2020. Barbara is the best person to lay out all of you need to know who are listening. This is a stage campaign. This isn't just the same thing all the time. We're doing this in stages. Those are very important to the practicality of what you two are asking us. So Barbara, maybe you could lay out those stages for people.
I'm sorry. I'm going to do the phases of our campaign.
Yeah.
Is that what you like, Jim? Okay.
Yeah.
So
where we are now. Where we're
okay.
going.
So let me just add for John, you talked about Georgia. Pennsylvania was even better. Not only did we have the 70 faith leaders who've never met each other on, but we live streamed it for the first time and had 5,000 views. So we're finding new ways. This is like we're making a cake as we go along. Somebody's at the store getting the ingredients and we're still got the oven going. So this is like so exciting that there were 5,000 views while we were doing this. Now the phases are 4. First phase is the one we're in right now, and it's the voter education, voter registration and information phase through these webinars that focus on what's at stake and know your rights. And in that phase, people can find out, they can articulate each one, diverse leaders, the rabbis and the Muslim leaders and younger millennial African-American clergy and white clergy and others and Hispanics can say, what's at stake in our community is language issues at the polls. What's at stake in our community are the synagogues are being burned and we don't have enough security. What's at stake? So that helps people to understand, how do we get people out to vote? What will motivate them to get out? Then we have the lawyers committee person on, a lawyer on, saying, here's an update of the voting laws. Here's what's changed and here's what you need to know. So that's the phase 1. Phase 2 is where we are moving right now. It's called we are watching. Jim talked about that. We are watching. What are we watching? We're watching the state election officials who are deputized and paid by taxpayers to run integrous, safe, and fair election. And we're meeting with them not in a hostile way, but to say, as citizens and as clergy, tell us how the election is going to be run. Tell us also what the changes are. Tell us the worst thing. As yesterday we said, what's the worst thing that can happen on election day? Tell us what happens if in Pennsylvania, for example, if people who are armed and they legally can carry arms to the polling sites to intimidate Black voters and brown voters and older voters. Tell us how you're going to manage that. What will your security be? How do we get our poll chaplain to work in cooperation with you? It's not a hostile meeting. We're just trying to say, information is power, and we're trying to put the power in the hands of the faith leaders on the ground. So on election day, we're not having a battle royal and nobody gets hurt and everybody gets to vote. That's the second phase. Third phase will happen in the summer when Jim Wallis will get Steph Curry from the, superstar basketball players and people like John Legend and others who are very committed to this, to get out and do events that will attract our younger voters, because that's the group that's not voting. The younger voters are far outnumbered, elder voters, baby boomers. And so we have to get them at the polls as well as low-income people. Those are the two categories that are underrepresented. And then the last phase, so that phase is what we call voter mobilization. Third phase is mobilization. So we go from education to now we're doing voter protection, voter mobilization. And then the fourth phase will be what we call, that's real voter protection. And that's protecting citizens at the polling sites, mobilizing thousands of faith leaders to go to the poorest voting sites, because middle-class people do not need protection, poor people do. And to say in the name of our God, these people will have the right to vote, to stand with them, to make sure, and to be tied with lawyers. This is where the lawyers and collars comes in, tied with lawyers who will be on the hotline where they can call in and say, this person has served time in prison, but they're out. Can they still vote? This person has a language problem. Can they get an interpreter? This person needs a wheelchair. Can they get a wheelchair? Where is the polling site? You say they moved. Where are they? Where you said this person can't vote today because they're underage. Well, they just turned 18 and they can vote. So we're really trying to make sure we carry this all the way to November and even beyond. But that's the 4 phases: our voter education, information, registration, mobilization, and protection. Those are the 4 phases of the campaign.
I keep being amazed at the depth, the quality, and the specificity of your toolkit and what you guys are doing. And one of the things I've noticed, and Jim, to you as well as to Barbara, every one of our guests who've been on these now 10 days of democracy dialogues have such valuable things that they're doing. And I just wish there was a way for these tools to be shared by every organization that's doing anything around the country, because you've created a roadmap, no matter whether you're in one of the critical states or the less critical states, of things that need to be done. Is this something, and I know, Barbara, you said that, people can go and just touch the map no matter where they are. How do we get this information out to every precinct, every state, every activist organization in the country?
And I'm going to add, let me add a specific to that question. Jim, I know you know the Movement Voter Project. A, are you working with them to provide this toolkit to their people on the ground? And B, I think you know Kyle Lehrman and Stephanie Young with When We All Vote, Michelle Obama's voter registration campaign, which is very big. In addition to what George is asking a little more generally, who are you working with, other partners outside of or inside of the religious and spiritual realm?
Okay, we are working right now. We're connecting with the League of Women Voters, ACLU, as we get closer to the election. New Georgia voters. We work with both faith and community leaders. So while our campaign is faith-based, we work with anyone who wants to work with us to help turn out voters and making voting easy. So that's who we are. So we call ourselves Faith United to Save Democracy, but I think we're all trying to save democracy.
We all have faith in democracy.
Yeah, and let me just say, it's really important for our listener today to know that we are working. Our team is working with secular partners in all of those states. It's not just multi-faith. We're working in Georgia. They're working with all the partners in Georgia, all the people you mentioned we want to work with. And what we bring in particular is a lot of practicality, as George, you said, but also when we're talking to election officials, our secretaries of state on these calls now that we are watching, it's almost like they can't not agree to a meeting with all these multi-faith leaders. They just can't. Now, some of them are sympathetic, some less so, but they can't not meet with us because we're not being perceived as some secular, progressive, partisan organization where all these faith leaders across our boundaries, so they have to meet with us. And then when we say we're not in this for partisan reasons, yeah, we're nonpartisan, but we're also, as I said before, this is rooted for us in the preciousness of the vote, what John Lewis called almost sacred, is because of the preciousness of each of us as the children of God. So the image of, we're always very theological as well as practical. We're protecting the Imago Dei movement here. And practically, I'll tell you, to have poll chaplains, I'll just take a couple stories. When armed voters or armed people armed white people come into black polling places with sidearms and stay there just to intimidate, it's one thing if other people approach them or lawyers, they're ready for that. But when they're surrounded by clergy in collars who say, you must be looking for the bathroom or something, you seem confused, let us show you where it is. Or when a truck shows up at a black polling place in Detroit, pickup truck, flags, guns, banners to intimidate. Again, if they're approached by somebody that they perceive as partisan on the other side, it's a different thing than when clergy in robes surround the car and say, we think you're in a no parking zone, so we're going to help move your car. You're to a different place. So it is both foundational, and whether people are religious or not, the inherent dignity of every citizen, and we'll say child of God, is crucial to our success. We talk that theology in every call, but then practically we trained, Barbara, I think 2,700 poll chaplains last time. I want to double that at least. I want to train 5,000 poll chaplains. We call them poll chaplains. It's a wonderful term this time. So we can use help and support in training. Those poll chaplains on the job, on the spot, are going to be crucial to all this. So both in terms of our vision, but in terms of our practical action, we want lawyers and collars. We want the collars to be on the ground, working with everybody else. John, all the groups you mentioned are groups that we know and will work with.
Yeah, and I put in the turnoutsunday.com is in the chats, hyperlink that they touch that, they go right to, if that's what you were asking. I think the question earlier, you asked a very practical question about how to get this information down in the ground to as many as possible. I think what you guys are doing is so amazing. I really want to thank you for this because this is how it's going to get out. I was on radio this morning at 6:20 a.m. With Philadelphia. We're going to be doing radio. People still listen to the radio on the way to work. There are other people who are still working out. There are other ways to get out. We'll start doing. We've done drop the mic on Instagram with younger people. My young people have got me on Instagram. We'll do TikTok. We'll do whatever it takes to get the message out. We won't dance or do anything crazy, but we will get the message out.
Are you sure you won't dance?
Well, I gotta say, I was with the network, the Catholic nuns on the bus, their 50th anniversary. I was with them Friday, and Barbara, after the program, all these Catholic sisters turned on the music and began dancing. So I was dancing with the nuns on.
Jim,
But there are ways to get the word out. The reality is, while we're national, every state has a experienced clergy leader with a church and a base and a network we call state leads. We meet with them by Zoom like every other month. What's going on in your state? How can we help? What do you need? And give support. And then it's through them that we work. It's better that we develop the base. It's from ground up, not top down.
Barbara, what can we as your audience do to support you practically? Money, leads, relationships, networking. Let us know how we can help.
Okay, so we're a 501c3 tax exempt organization. Thank you so much, John. You sound like a practical guy. And I like that. We need
Actually, Margot suggests that because I tend to forget to ask that question.
Okay, well, thank you, Margot.
Yeah,
Thank you, Margot. Thank you. We need money. I mean, we're making bricks with no straw, if you understand that. We're doing a lot with a little. We just decide we're just going to do it, however it takes. So getting money helps us to do what helps to bring. I mean, I look like a Wonder Woman. I'm not. So the support you all have already given has helped us to bring another person on. We need money to start mobilizing and training poll chaplain that Jim just talked about. We have 6 months until the election. We have a time to do it right. The question was just asked about getting the word out. So we need if you have a radio broadcast or you have a broadcast of any type, social media, podcast, we're happy to go on and help get the word out. I think those are practical things that people can do, helping to get this toolkit out. It's for people all over the country. It's not just our 10 states.
And then aside from going online to donate, if somebody has a radio show or a chaplain that doesn't know about this, or a rabbi or an imam, what's the best way to find either or both of you?
I will put my email in the chat right now, and that's the best way. And I do respond.
I can attest to that.
Jim, when I was listening to you talk about the poll chaplains and the impact they have because of their standing in the world in difficult moments where partisan people do not. As I've watched this lunacy unfold in America, one of my questions is, where is the clergy when it comes to calling a truth and a lie a lie? I don't know. I mean, I can't speak to what happens in houses of worship and spiritual centers. But it seems to me that the voice of the clergy is absent when it comes to this particular calling the insanity, the lack of ethics and whatnot for what they are. Can you give me some insight on that?
Well, that's kind of what I do full time. I just put my email in the chat too. I think, let's be honest, what we're talking about here, the silence is not from Black clergy. The silence is from white clergy.
Yes.
We're going to be honest here. White clergy in America, white Christians, have an identity problem. It's not just education and content. They have a false identity problem, because in the phrase white Christian, as long as the operative word in that phrase is white and not Christian or white evangelical, we have a problem. So I've been at Georgetown, we've been having Raphael Warnock come, Terry Sewell, Eddie Glaude, Jamie Raskin last week. And this is This is a deep question about who we are, not just what our politics are. And so there's a text going back to what you just said in John, where Jesus says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Big text for us, right? Gospel text. Well, the opposite of that, or the implication of that, is if you don't know the truth or don't tell the truth, you remain captive. And what too many white Christians are now captive to is an ideology which I'd call an idol, called white Christian nationalism. So when you look at the insurrection, they did it in the name of the big lie of a stolen election. Interesting, the people who said the last election was stolen when the evidence shows it wasn't are overtly planning on stealing the next two elections, the same people. But I'm saying underneath that big lie is a bigger lie. And the bigger lie is racism. The bigger lie is white Christian nationalism. So for me, as a Christian from European ancestry, this is about our salvation. It's not about helping minorities or something. It's about our salvation, because I'll put it very bluntly as a theologian, when the idol of whiteness captivates white Christians, idols separate people from God. That's what the Bible says. Idols separate people from God. The idol of whiteness is separating white Christians from God. Now, I won't make Barbara say that, but I'll say that. And so this is a religious issue for us. And to put it practically again, a lot of Black pastors say to me, ask your question, are white pulpits and white Christians going to preach about voting rights from the pulpit? I ask my white students at Georgetown all the time, have you ever heard a sermon from your home pulpit or church on racism? They all say, no, we never did. Which means white Christians have missed the biggest sin in American history from their pulpits. They do other sins all the time, which we know what their preaching is. So I'm going to call for a pulpit test here. A pulpit test for white pulpits and white churches. And we've got white Christians on our calls. We've got that minority into the calls now, because this is the elephant in the room for this whole thing, which is very soon we're going to be no longer a white majority nation. We're going to be a nation of minorities. And so who's going to help navigate that? We will either achieve a multiracial democracy for the first time, or we'll lose our democracy altogether. That's what's at stake. So I'm going to be saying as loudly as I can that white churches need to preach about voting rights and democracy as a religious issue. The silence, as you say, must be broken. And the good news, particularly from some younger white preachers, is that starting to happen.
Thank you very much, Jim. Really, thank you. Jim, I can feel you pulsating there in the background. Will you come on and join us for this part of the conversation? There you are.
Sure. Thank you. Just to jump in, because I've been listening very attentively, Jim, I'd like to just deepen the remarks that you're making about white Christian racism, essentially, in the evangelical community. And I think the question is, as someone who's been involved as a Christian in this struggle for 50 years now, and been observing the shape-shifting of religion in America, I would say, also globally, but let's just talk about America in this instance. how would you frame the movement in the Christian church, particularly in the evangelical movement around race? And I'm just wondering, would you, for example, under the Trump years, did the evangelical Christians become even more explicitly racist? Are there now fissures in that monolith where evangelicals are breaking away? Because that evangelical Christian bastion is at the heart of what's empowering both the Trump ideology, the Republican extremism. So any cracks in that edifice would have a reverberative impact far in excess of their numbers, as it were. So your analysis of how this has evolved over several decades now, I think would be very, very helpful for us to be informed by.
Well, Barbara
And
and I
I'd like to respond to that as well after
Right.
Jim.
Yeah, well,
I'm
please.
gonna say, Barbara and I are raising that question all the time. So let me start and then turn to Barbara. We're involved in making cracks in that right now. Let me just say, when people say evangelicals, what they mean is white evangelicals. Byron William Skinner is an evangelical. He's a Black evangelical. And I'll still call myself an evangelical because I define it the way Jesus did in his opening sermon in Luke, where he quoted Isaiah. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor." Now, the word good news there is evangel. That's the word in Greek from which we get the word evangelical, which means any gospel that isn't good news to the poor is not the gospel of Jesus Christ, is not evangelical. So I want to tell them, no, you're not being evangelical. You're not being evangelical enough. You're being conformed to the world. You're conformed. I've got megachurch pastors who tell me, I got my people at best 2 hours a week and Fox News has them 24/7. So it's a matter of identity again. So instead of abandoning evangelical, Barbara and I go right at them with, here's what it means. Here's what Jesus said it means. Here's what the Bible says it means. And so I've got a program this summer at Georgetown. It's called the Faith and Just Academy. It's called Training Leaders for a New American Church. So all kinds of young pastors and seminarians are coming because we need a new church, and the church will be a minority, a remnant of white Christians joining together with their Black brothers and sisters in the churches to make literally a new American church. That's the moment we're in. And Barbara and I were in a conversation this last week with about this whole question of evangelical and changing them. I'll just say the head of the National Association of Evangelicals, Walter Kim, Asian American, cares deeply about racism, and he was agonizing with me on the phone several times when his people were inside the Capitol, and he knew it. So Barbara.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I think it's really important to understand history. I want to go back to relationships. Jim and I are making a breakthrough. I'll say that first, because over the past, let's say 10 years, Jim, we've been working with a group of white evangelicals through what we call the Circle of Protection that began to focus on protecting the poor in the federal budget so that they wouldn't bear the brunt of all of our military spending. Okay, so over the years, as we've talked about poverty, we have led them to move slowly toward the intersection of poverty and racism, to the point where a few years ago in 2017, we were able to put out a declaration, which we'd love to share with you guys, on racism and poverty, which we share with every member of Congress. Now, we still, as we talk about race in these groups, it's mostly silence from the whites, except Jim is talking, maybe one or two others. Well, more recently, I asked if we could have a conversation about critical race theory because it's just, one more big lie that is being perpetrated. Well, since we're for Jesus and not for lying, I said, why can't we have a conversation about that too? The point here is that the more we build a relationship, the easier it was to have a conversation. So it was between myself and a member of the National Association of Evangelicals. When he and I talked offline about it in preparation for this talk before the larger group, we both agreed that there's systems of discrimination. And we didn't disagree, but we have developed a trust with each other where we can have that conversation. We wouldn't have been able to have that 10 years ago. Okay, fast forward. Jim talked about, your question implies that, Jim Garrison, that, white evangelicals started losing their minds and losing their focus on the cross and on Jesus with Trump. This has been going on since before Martin Luther King Jr. and remember it was okay. So that the people who were most engaged in slavery were evangelicals and fundamentalist Christian churches. Okay, Harvard University just agreed yesterday to give $100 million to study their wrong. Georgetown University, where Jim teaches, is into that. So I'm saying the church, and not just the evangelical church, has been rooted in the big lie that this is a white country. And now what we find ourselves is up against the wall of humanity that's not all white, and we don't really know what to do in a humanitarian and compassionate way. So what you're just raising the question is so important. The more we get to spend time with each other and realize that we're on this planet, this fragile planet together, the more we will find that we need each other and we have to find ways to work together.
Oh, Barbara, just a quick follow-up to this. Just curious, you and Jim, what your relationship is with Reverend Dr. William Barber, who's obviously so much in the same space and speaking out.
Yeah, I know Reverend Barber very well, and have done, a number of things with he and his Poor People's Campaign. They have a focus on very specific things that are around that campaign only. If they know about our campaign, we informed everybody about it. The NAACP, Reverend Barber, anyone who we think is working in voting rights, we will get something out to them about it, because I think this problem is so big, John, that we can't afford to be disconnected and divided.
And then
I just been reading in the chats here, and let me just share a text. I've been, evangelicals share texts all the time. So Barbara and I are talking about gospel text. There's a text in Galatians, Galatians 3:28, very famous among Christians. It says, there is no longer Jew or Gentile, bond or free, male or female. You are one in Christ. That's what the text says. Now, those are the major divisions in human history: race, class, and gender. What I've learned is that text, Galatians 3:28, was a baptismal formula in the early church, and which means it was recited at all the baptisms of all the early Christians, that text. They were saying, in effect, hey, what we're doing here is we're trying to overcome the divisions of race and class and gender. We don't do it perfectly, but that's a big part of our job. So if you don't want to do that, we're tearing them down, pulling them down. If you don't want to do that, you better go somewhere else. That's what they were saying. Imagine if the American churches were saying that. If you don't want to pull down those barriers, you should go somewhere else, because that's what we do. Interestingly enough, that text was removed. The slaveholder Bible that's at Fisk University shows that text was removed from the slaveholder Bible, because that text is a threat, was a threat to slavery, a threat to racism. The idea that we're all coming together across those boundaries is a terrible threat, because it's at the heart for us of the gospel.
Yeah, there's a useful book also, if you want to know more about the history and context of evangelism, white evangelism, and that is Jesus and John Wayne. It's a more recent book, and I found it quite helpful. easy read, but that's as well. But I think we really have to focus now on our fragile democracy. I don't think people understand the danger. This is like a house on fire when half the country doesn't believe in the Constitution, and elected officials are coming to the polls in November who literally don't believe in the Constitution or in democracy. And I heard John Bannon, is it Bannon?
Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon.
Steve Bannon say in 2017, right after the inauguration, that out of his mouth, I couldn't believe it, because sometimes I do watch Fox News on my better days. I watched, and he said, the goal is deconstruction of democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're watching. So everything we can do together, that's why I want to get, I'm sorry we have to, if the racism is real, but I'm telling you, if there's no plan, if there's no democracy, what do we have? We need to ask ourselves, if we don't have democracy, if we don't have laws, if we're a lawless country, if we run by an autocracy, is that what we want? Because if we don't get everybody voting and everybody secure in their citizenship, that's what we're going to have.
And that should bring us together. The chat showing me all kind of opinions about religion. People are different places, angry about religion. I understand all that. But January 20th, 2025, when the president who won the election in 2024 is inaugurated, will be the milestone day to see if democracy has survived or not. So we're not doing this just for 2022. We're going all the way to 2024. And literally, democracy is at stake more than any time in our lifetimes. And if we can come together, whatever we think about religion or not, we've got to come together to protect and restore, and I think fulfill what democracy is. And that's at stake right now and in these next 3 years.
Jim, that's another thing that your toolkit does that I think that far too many people who are out in the trenches are not doing. You have that chart in your toolkit where you talk about what happens if we lose democracy, what's on the line. And understanding that conglomeration of things that go away if democracy goes away should just cause people a lot of sleepless nights until they roll up their sleeves and get involved. And that linkage is really critical,
Absolutely.
If we did a referendum on this call of everything people on this call most care about, you'd have climate change, you would have the criminal justice system, you'd have inequities in education. COVID was revelatory. It revealed our inequities. On this call, there'd be all those issues: education, economy, immigration, all those issues. All those issues are at stake here with voting rights. All those other issues are at stake. So voting rights isn't like, is it number 3, number 4, number 2? Everything is at stake in this battle for democracy. Right now is about voting rights. So that's why I say voting rights is not just a political issue. It's a moral issue. It's an ethical issue. It's a religious issue.
Jim and Barbara, could I just ask what relationships you have in this mobilization that is so noble, really? For example, are you coordinating with the Vatican in Rome? Are you coordinating with the Orthodox Church in Athens to help you mobilize back in the United States? Or are you doing it mostly kind of church by church, congregation by congregation? Because the sensitivities in the world religious community and leadership is very acute, I would say, right now around these matters.
So if you could help us get in touch with the Vatican and with Athens, we'll do a toolkit for them too.
Actually, it's funny, on our calls, we have Catholic priests and bishops and lots of, and I say, and here's Father so-and-so or sisters, Catholic women religious are core to everything I've done for years. I say, here comes that, she's representing the Vatican. This time, Francis is on our side.
Yeah.
Everything Francis says about democracy and ecology and poverty. He took his name, Francis, because of he was going to fight for the poor and for the planet and for peace. That's why he took the name. So we really have, and at Georgetown, I'm this Jesuit school, I'm helping them revive their Jesuit values. And so we really have a whole lot of, and the Orthodox Church, we've been involved with fighting Kirill, the Moscow patriarch too. But finally, as Barbara and I have learned so well, this isn't just going to be top down with all the people around the world who are supporting us. This is going to be county by county, city by city. When the one thing we haven't mentioned yet, and I got to get it in, what our Georgia friends say to us, they say we can out-mobilize, out-organize all those laws, like Barbara's saying, except the one that allows state legislatures to overturn local election results. They'll overturn Fulton County, where Atlanta is, or Wayne County, where my hometown of Detroit is. So we're working really hard, working with Jim Clyburn. There's a meeting this morning with Coons' staff, and Raphael Warnock, our dear friend. We're going to be putting that forward. We've got to focus on what this is really, Clyburn calls it voter nullification. This is voter nullification, use King's language over again. So we got to really overturn and block and clarify in the narrative. The narrative gets confusing in the states because one party's doing, voter restrictions, the other party's against it, and people say, oh, that's just partisan, right? No, we're going to clarify the narrative on a national level and a local level that this is about literally a partisan overturning of local election results. So everything's at stake. All the issues that your folks listening here care about are going to be impacted primarily by what happens with these elections.
But I think Jim Garrison is raising a very powerful question. We're doing what we can with what we have, right? And we're trying to, with help of people like yourselves who have a network much greater than mine and Jim's, to get the word out. We can provide the tools, we have credibility, we have relationships. Everything we've done so far has been through relationships. If I need to find a Latino, I'll find somebody I've worked with forever. I don't go look up people. So this is almost getting to be like a family, that's growing. We haven't had this kind of multiracial connection, multi-faith connection, even with community people who are not in faith since the civil rights movement. All right. So you're helping us even through this podcast. I mean, I can get so caught up in state by state and getting very practical, but I think Jim is even provoking me to think about ways that we can speak through the common themes of democracy and freedom to a world that is crying out now for freedom. So I don't want us to lose sight of that, Jim. Thank you for raising that.
Thanks, Barbara. For both of you, one of my questions is, and I'm asking it these days about a lot of things, but it seems to me that one of the reasons I, as a citizen, get frustrated is I look at the condition of the big lie, I look at the insurrection, I look at the kinds of nullification laws that you're talking about, Jim, and I keep asking myself, where the hell is Merrick Garland and our Justice Department? Are they doing enough? And if they're not doing enough, is there something that the clergy, is there something that we citizens can do to give them a gentle enough whack on the side of the head that says, you may be doing something, but we don't know about it? Or where are you on that? Either of you, both of you.
Yeah.
I took that question to Jamie Raskin last week. He's on the committee. And he said, well, Garland is one of my constituents because of where he lives. So I'm going to be kind. And what Jamie says is these hearings going public now in June will be decisive for impacting the narrative. And so there's even differences on the committee, his committee, about whether they're moving fast enough in justice, whether it's like the old mafia thing, coming up from the bottom slowly to get the top, or whether they should move fast. I don't know the answer because I don't know the internal workings of the Department of Justice. Jamie Raskin, who's the most outspoken person we have on this, is saying it's all coming, be patient, it's coming. But his hearings are going to put enormous pressure on the Department of Justice to act, I think.
I don't think that's enough, though. I think it's a beginning, but I feel that this Justice Department has done an injustice, and it's, you know, it's on our watch in the party that I happen to be in. So at the White House Rose Garden celebration for incoming Associate Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, I pulled the Associate Attorney General Kristen Clark over and said, "What are you guys doing about these states? We are getting killed out here. We can't organize fast enough for the laws that are being." For example, yesterday we find out in the Pennsylvania meeting with the Pennsylvania Secretary of State that they're trying to eliminate all drop boxes. We don't have enough money to raise to fight every one of these lawsuits. There's a lawsuit up there right now, but going before this Pennsylvania Supreme Court. But you all can get on that right away. What are you doing? And I said, I'm willing to put together an interfaith group of clergy to get a briefing on this. And so you're right on target with that question. That's what we have got to do. We have got to put pressure on them. That's supposed to be our Justice Department, but I don't feel that they're serving us well.
And the Congress isn't going to do what's needed to be done because of all the vetoing of things. So the Department of Justice, and we're asking the same questions to our friends in the Biden White House, Department of Justice and executive orders, if need be, need to protect democracy in this critical moment. So we can't wait on them and hope for the best. I hope the hearings put pressure on them, but Barbara's right. We have to speak up and speak out and act. They have to protect our democracy right now.
And Jim and Barbara, George has pointed this out along with a lot of other people, that Kamala Harris would have been a great choice to be the Attorney General and probably would have kicked a little butt. In a situation like this, can pressure, or should pressure, be brought on the president to replace Garland if by a certain date he has not acted?
I think it's a great idea. Absolutely. I honestly, Jim is better with the White House than I am.
Right.
They are so tired of me calling over there whining about what I don't like. But I think you're absolutely correct. Jim, what do you think?
Well, I think that day that Barbara talked about on the South Lawn, when Judge, soon to be Ketanji Brown Jackson, spoke. Let me just say, it was a pastoral day for a lot of us that we needed in all these battles, to have her stand up and talk about her life represents one generation between segregation and the Supreme Court. And when she said, "I am the hope and dream of a slave," that's when we all lost it. And so we were not just there talking to our friends saying, hey, you're doing a good job. We're all for you. We were there. Barbara and I were both there, and we were talking to friends in the White House and Congress and Senate. So activism was going on that day as well. So I think there's got to be some time frames. So I'm not sure, John, what the time frames should be, but there has to be some time frames. I am hoping that these hearings finally will open up the narrative and dialogue, but there has to be some results. We can't just live with watching this on the news. We have to speak out and speak up and utilize all of our relationships to say, justice has to be done. And whether justice is done now in the short term is going to be determinative of all the issues that people on this call care most about.
One of the reasons why, despite all of our best efforts and passion, and we are very passionate about voting and about democracy, but despite of all of our best efforts, when people see a lawless administration passed and they see no repercussion, nobody went to jail, nobody got handcuffed, people were caught doing illegal things, people were ripping off the government, made themselves wealthy, did everything except, carry off the whole country to another country. I mean, right now, I think you invite cynicism because people think that there's really no repercussion for even people supporting Putin over our nation. I mean, what I'm saying is that John is raising an action item to me. I think 6 months is enough time to figure out if you have a Justice Department. I don't mean a bunch of lawyers up there. I mean a Justice Department that acts justly and quickly.
My sense is if there's going to be a change, it will happen in January of 2023. It certainly should happen sooner, but if not by then. And the other thing is you're talking, the big bank bailouts in 2008 and 2009 were for the wealthy banks and not for the people. And here we are again. And the other thing that I want to say is an honoring. And I almost get the chills as listening to you and about to ask this question. The leadership that you are taking on behalf of American pro-democracy clergy is of a level of inspiration that I have not felt since Trump was elected. And my question is, and it also brings up the interesting conversation of separation of church and state, which I'm sure you all have talked about. Has there been another time in our history when people like you have stepped up like this to preserve the country that gives you the freedom to preach and to fight for the poor and to fight for justice? Because boy, are you, and girl, are you out there?
Well, I mean, I take inspiration from even outside of the country, from William Wilberforce, who started, in his 20s, as a statesman and the legislature working to end slavery in England. And not until his deathbed, 50 some years later, did he ever see the fruit of his labor. I take solace from people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was nearly beaten to death, for just trying to register people to vote, not to even vote, register them to vote. And I take solace from Dr. King, who was on his way to candidate for a church in Montgomery, Alabama. He was not even thinking about, being a world icon. He and his wife were 26 years old, 26, 27 years old when they went. So I think the issue is that it's what I call the difference between purpose and promise. The promise is from Abraham, the promise to bless the whole world. Abraham was father of three great religions that bless the whole world through you and your seed. I consider myself the seed of Abraham. And it is my responsibility with the breath that I have and the time I have on the earth to do whatever God has given me, whatever favor, talent, ability, access, exposure. And I've gotten an amazing amount of access and exposure coming from a very poor family, okay, in California. So I think we all have the responsibility to say in our time and place on earth, what are we doing to make a difference? And it doesn't all have, I don't consider what we're doing big things. I'm at my kitchen table working. We have on my team is 3 people. We do the work of 60 because we're efficient and we have very few funds, but what we have, we believe that we're stewards of. And then God has given us favor and open doors for us. I think that I feel like when Jim Garrison asked the question about the globe, like maybe I'm failing. I hadn't even thought about Pope Francis. We probably should be talking to him. Okay, now you just got me started. Okay, but the point is that I think you're doing what you're doing. Every one of us, I think, on this call is trying our level best to make the planet better. And we're doing it together and we're doing it in different ways. That's how I see it.
And
Well, I
Barbara,
have to say, Barbara, that if everyone who is listening anywhere to this now or in replay would answer your question and say, what am I doing? Am I doing enough? Am I doing what my talent, my heart, my impulse leads me to do? We wouldn't be in the trouble that we are in. And that's a fundamental and critical question that each one of us has to answer. And those of you who are on the call, why don't you make it an action today to send an email or call the Justice Department and say, what the hell are you doing to save democracy?
Send it to the White House also.
Send it to the White House. We have to speak up. It is a critical and urgent thing.
And for your question, for this crowd, your audience here, let me put this in a spiritual context. The problem isn't Trump. We all, Trump unleashed. The choice is always between our better angels and our worst demons. Trump has unleashed our worst demons. And when I stay up at night worrying about is, will our worst demons triumph over our better angels? So that's what's at stake here. And it's historical because on our calls, we have Jewish rabbis after a call who are in tears because they're saying, I feel like this call and this coalition is finally reestablishing the relationship between Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. We've lost that relationship. We're finding it again here. And our imams joining the calls who have felt excluded for so long by all of us. And they're feeling, we're here, we're in this conversation. And Barbara and I are just thrilled, but we called each other last night about some of these younger voices on this call, some of these young Black pastors. They are amazing. So on these calls, we're doing a program, very practical, but we feel like we're doing something that's historical again. We don't create, Martin Luther King Jr., he became head of the Montgomery Improvement Association because he was the newest minister in town, didn't have many enemies yet, and people heard he was a good speaker. I mean, it kind of came to him. So this is coming to us. It's coming to all of us. It's about our better angels and our worst demons, and it's about whether or not the multiracial democracy that would make this country exceptional for the first time, is possible. And that depends on all of us. And in my tradition, the powers and principalities that are behind the systems, they don't want that to happen. They're going to do everything they can. And the conformity to them by people in power, it's natural for people in power to submit to those powers. So it's got to be on the outside. It can't just be on the inside. It's got to be on the outside. Movements are always a dance between the outside and the inside. And we're doing that here. but we need every one of you. George, you just gave an altar call. We need everyone on this call to do what they can do in the middle of their relationships and their influence. We all have influence. We all have platforms. We all do. What can you do? And we're happy to connect with any of you in these critical next 3 years ahead. And right now, today and tomorrow, and a month and 6 months from now.
And Jim and Barbara, where do we make our donations to you guys?
I just put it in the chat. It's SkinnerLeaders.org. Skinner Leaders is one word. .org.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking again. Thank Margot for that.
It's been a pleasure, just an absolute pleasure. Jim, there could not be, I think, a better way to wrap up this second week in the series. And we may talk to you about coming back in one or more of the future weeks to give us some update. And I just had an idea of, instead of waiting for someone else to do it, maybe what we should devote the next week of the Democracy Dialogues is 5 days of panels that bring together the leaders of a broad range of organizations. Let's talk to them straight and get deeper levels of cooperation. Just an idea for what's coming. I'm really grateful to have spent this time with both of you, always with John and Jim. And Jim, do you want to take us out, or do one of you have any other closing comments?
No, we're good. Okay.
Well, thank you.
I feel blessed by this call. I'll just say that. I feel blessed.
Yeah, I feel encouraged because some days, I'll be honest with you, I feel like we just aren't doing enough. So calls like this encourage me to keep doing, what we're doing, and God will leverage it, and you're helping us to leverage it. I just want to leave us with a quote from John Lewis, who was a protege of Dr. Martin Luther King and met him when he was 15. And before he died, he said, voting is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have. It's almost sacred. We're talking about the sacred now. We're not talking about the political. We're talking about what's sacred.
And that, my friends, is a beautiful final word. We're not talking even about politics. We're talking about what's most sacred, and that's the dignity of each human being to self-expression in the community of others. So, Jim, Barbara, thank you so much for this depth of wisdom and depth of illumination around a crisis that we have in this country, which, if not solved, will make it impossible to solve any of our other problems. And you've brought that to light in a very powerful way, both of you. John and Margot, I want to thank you for bringing Jim and Barbara and the others this week to the foreground here at Humanity Rising. George, thank you as ever. Barbara, I want to link you up with the Vatican. That's one small thing I can do.
I'm ready.
If we could get Francis to say something about democracy.
Yes.
I'm willing to take that on. I know a few folks.
Okay.
So I will be in touch, and who knows what graces the Spirit will provide as we go into this next 7 months, and knowing that it's not visible powers in the end, but the invisible power of the Spirit that guides the most deeply the affairs of humankind.
And Barbara, I do actually have someone that you can talk to who is really on Pope Francis's staff. So we're going to make that happen.
Oh, absolutely. I was just going to get off this call and go to call my prayer warriors, but I'll talk to you.
We will be in touch. So thank you, everyone.
Right.
That brings our session to a close and our program this week on democracy to a close. Thank you all so much. Next week, we have a 5-day program on regenerative health. One of the challenges is just our health as we go through pandemic, crisis in democracy, climate change. Our health is being adversely affected worldwide. So we've assembled a panel of specialists that will be guiding us in how we regenerate our physical and emotional and psychological well-being while we're navigating this very complicated world. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.
Great.